Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for waiting. We are about to commence our first webinar for the semester in collaboration with the Human Resource Management Association of Barbados. We'll be led with a presentation. Today's presenter will be Mr. Shane Howell. My name is Dawn Marie Holder. I'm the Career Counseling Specialist in the Office of Student Services. We there are multiple things happening today, so thank you for taking the time to sign in, to log on, and to join us. And at this time, my colleague Miss Toppin, Katania Toppin, she is going to tell us a little about Mr. Howell, and then we will get right into today's presentation about the language of the workplace and tips for managing your boss. Over to you, Katania.
I'm Katania Toppin, and I'll share a bit more about Mr. Howell in his bio. Shane, an experienced and a trained and experienced human resources practitioner, is currently the Chief Operations Officer at Profiles Caribbean, one of the leading recruitment and talent development companies in Barbados. He has worked in various capacities in HR within the energy, telecommunications, and hospitality sectors. Shane's first degree was in psychology at the University of the West Indies Cayfield campus before pursuing a master's degree in industrial or organizational psychology at the University of London, Birkbeck College. He is also a SHRM Senior Certified Professional and is also a certified practitioner in the Genos Emotional Intelligence and Everything This assessments. Much of his experience and emphasis has been in the area of recruitment and organizational development. Over the years, Shane has worked with many students and graduates of the university on topics relating to their transition to the workplace. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Shane Howell.
All right, thanks so much, Katanya. Appreciate the introduction. As I had told Marie, I'm not big on bios, so I was hoping that as much of that would have been cut out as possible. So thank you for keeping it short, keeping it brief. Good morning, well, good afternoon actually to everyone. And as Don Marie would have said, it is an interesting time. You know that there's the press conference ongoing now, and we're hearing that we have even less flexibility when it comes to the weekend and so on. But ultimately, we know that this is for the greater good. My presentation today is really to help you when it comes to your good, and that is how do you maximize your career? How do you make the best career choice, so to speak? And by that, I mean you already know the areas that you want to get into. But when you actually get into the workplace, how is that integration smooth? How do you improve how well you become integrated into the environment? So that's really what I'm here to do. I wanted to keep it simple. We're just going to be having a chat for the most part. But as I would have named the presentation, it's really the language of the workplace. And I want to talk about those things that they don't teach you. I want to talk about those things that we don't necessarily hear when we're going to school. And I share a similar reality, having come through University of the West Indies. And I commend Marie and the team for holding this type of session. So if that when we talk about tips for managing your boss, what are we referring to? And I really want to start off by drawing your attention to something that I think many of you can relate to, may have heard of, and something that I know that I can relate to. We are socialized to believe that if you're good at what you do, success will follow you. So I mean, from a youngster coming up, you hear, do well at common entrance, do well at CXCs, do well at, well, my time, I'm gonna age myself right now, do well at A levels or CAPE. And equally, when you get into university, get a degree, you'll graduate, get a job, you'll pay well, become an entrepreneur, earn some money, and you'll do well in your career. And with that said, I've seen persons who left Barbados with a scholarship and struggled to find work. I've seen persons who have left university with first class honors and persons that may have gotten upper second, lower second got jobs before them. And the reality is, and it's a stark reality, and it's a reality that we don't always want to hear. The world that we live in is not one based strictly on merit. We don't operate strictly on a meritocratic type society. And there's a simple reason for that. Society is full of people. And the simple nature of people means that decisions that will be made will not be 100% objective. It means that many other things will shape the outcomes. And this is why I'm here to say, and the tips that I want to give you today are not about manipulation, it's not about dishonesty, it's not about you hiding incompetence, but as you becoming sensitive to the realities of the organization and in so doing, better position yourself, having developed some competence to move forward in your careers. And hopefully that is a fair position for everyone as we go through the next 40 or so minutes. Yeah. So my question for you is a relatively simple one, and it is really, and just let me know if you can see my screen. If anything, you can message in the chat. But what you should be seeing would be instructions to go to something called Slido, which is essentially what I need everyone to do on your personal devices is to actually go to slido.com. So just pull up a browser very quickly. It will prompt you to put in a code, and that code would be 3895. So you're going to your browser, put in the code 3895, and I just want you to respond to this poll really, really quickly. And it's really asking, what do you want from your next role? So just imagine you've left university, you get your first job, or maybe you decide to go off and you're an entrepreneur. What is your expectation? What do you want as quickly as possible? So this is just what I want you to respond to very, very quickly. You can also scan the QR code, but what is it that you want? So I have one person thus far saying a competitive salary, and I'm just going to give persons a couple minutes just to get there because you know you have to get to the browser and navigate and so on. Competitive salary, career advancement opportunities. And we should have about 14, 15 persons on the call, so I'm going to at least get to just over half before I address it. Learning and development opportunities is leading the way right now. Career advancement opportunities, competitive salary, learning development opportunities just got overtook by career advancement opportunities. All right, this is looking like a pretty close battle. So we have about 10 persons, just over half of you have commented so far. And I mean that some persons may still be coming into vote, and that's perfectly fine. But if I just go based on what we're seeing here, learning and development opportunities, career advancement opportunities, a competitive salary, all make sense. All things that I think that we can all appreciate. And when I think back to when I first graduated university, these are to a large extent those things that I wanted, primarily the first two, I would say. And I am sharing and speaking from a position as some person who left university and had about 7 different jobs. So up to this point in time, and I believe that a couple of my other colleagues are on the call. Nicholas, I don't think he worked as many places as me, but 7 places I would have worked since I left university, and I would dare say I didn't leave university too long ago. So we kind of ended that on most persons agreeing that the biggest thing that they're looking for would be development opportunities. And that's fine. But I'm going to say to you that I suspect most of you have heard about mentors. Less of you have heard about sponsors. I'm going to go out there and say, I believe that less persons have heard about sponsors and the importance of sponsors. And again, I'm going to link that to the idea of the language of the workplace and managing your boss. And I want to share with you this quote by Sylvia Ann Hewlett. And she said it better than I could ever say, and that's why I wanted to use this quote. The most important functions of a sponsor are to believe in your value and be willing to use up political capital on your behalf, advocate for you in public and behind closed doors, and be in your corner so that you can take risks. And when I heard this, I thought that this was fantastic. Be willing to use up political capital, believe in your value, and advocate for you both in public and quote unquote in private. Now, why is this important? How is this tied to the whole idea of managing your boss? Well, let me share this story with you. Not too long after I left university, I think this would have been about my third job or my fourth job out, I would have gone to work at Chefette Restaurants as the human resource officer. Yeah, I went in as an HR officer. And I remember that at the time, um, my boss at the time, great boss, and it's only upon reflection that I recognized how significant his value was. And it was relatively early in my tenure. We had done some things together. I was working, and I recall that we had to make a presentation to the senior management team at the time, the owner of the organization, and most persons would know um, of the Halut family and so on. And I remember that we had to make a presentation. And, I did my PowerPoint and I did everything and I handed that over to my boss and thinking who would have been the HR manager. And I had the expectation that, when we had to go to make this presentation, he was going to be the one to make the presentation. I would have just been accompanying him. And I recall that he would have said at the time, just before the meeting, to be honest with you, he asked me if I was ready for the presentation. And I said, well, I don't have to do much. I'm just here to support you. And he said, no, you're going to make that presentation. And in that moment, within a couple moments, I had to walk into that meeting and present to the most senior team of the company, being relatively green. Now, that was almost traumatic for me. I mean, I was treated very well in the meeting, but that was the start of my career. And again, it was only on reflection years later that I recognized the value of what that HR manager was being at that time. That is being my sponsor. Because I was getting what I think most of us would want to get if you go into a new job, especially early in your career, but the reality is right through your career. High visibility assignments, the license to fail. And what do I mean by the license to fail? You have ideas. You see things differently simply because whether it be your generation, your perspective, your background, the country you're from, whatever the case may be, you have something to bring to the table. But it sometimes will mean that you want to take risks. And only if you've built up sufficient capital are you given that license to fail. That is, you've proven that you can deliver. And I'm now giving you the space that if this doesn't work out, I will protect you. Which brings up the next point, protection. Because everything will not always go well. And ultimately, recommendations for promotion, which ties in with what person said. You mentioned learning and development opportunities. You mentioned career development opportunities. All of these things are essentially facilitated by a sponsor. A sponsor is a person who believes in you. But how is this tied then to what I said before? Because you might be thinking, if I'm just good at what I do, I got a good degree, I go into the company, by default, I should get these opportunities. And I'm here to say to you, no. I am here to say to you with confidence, it does not necessarily work like that. And what that sometimes leads to is persons going into jobs and leaving because maybe their relationship with the boss isn't what they expected or what they wanted. It might be a situation where they don't necessarily feel as though they're being fulfilled or developed. It may be just different elements of that relationship is what leads to such high turnover. And in this quote that you're seeing on the screen, it says that people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses. And it doesn't necessarily mean a bad boss is a person who shouts at you and carries on, but simply you're not getting what you wanted from that relationship. So let me start to pull this together for you. And I want to share these two kind of grounding thoughts. And the first is that it's not about you. The first is that it is not about you. And this is one of the first mistakes and one of the first things that I like persons to understand. When many of us go into the workplace, we have a belief that it's about us. And why do I say that? Because oftentimes, even when persons are interviewing, and I've interviewed so many persons in my time, many persons go into a company and say, I want this, I want to do that, or this is exactly, I want to learn this, I want to be able to grow in this company. And it sounds good on paper, but in the mind of the company, it really isn't about you, but it's what value you're bringing to the company. The sooner that you realize it's not about you is when it becomes about you. So let me explain that a little bit further. You're there to make your boss look good. Few people would take issue with that, but you are there to make your boss look good. And the more you can frame your language to suggest that you're there to add value to what they're doing, then by nature, persons will feel more comfortable investing in you and developing you to get to that point where you're adding value to what they want. And I'll give you this other example. I think one of my earlier jobs, before the one I mentioned just now, I went to a company and I was greeted by the HR manager. I met with the CEO, and they said, and I didn't think it was anything wrong because it wasn't an HR role. I said, I'm here to do a good job. Ultimately, I'm hoping to take his job. And when I said it, I didn't mean to get rid of him. I just meant that, he was getting a bit older. So in a few years, hopefully, my career drive and so on, that I'd be in a position to become HR manager. And let me say to you that soured that relationship from day one. From that very day on, our relationship was never the same. Because I wasn't talking about adding value to the department, to the organization, etc. I was talking about my career goals. So one of the first things that I want to share with you, it is not about you. And we need to be able to change our language and fashion our language based on that stark reality. Yeah. So my next question, I'm going to ask you just to drop this into the chat box, is what is your greatest asset? What is your greatest asset? What is the thing that you are bringing to the workplace? And I'm going to give you a couple options very quickly. Is it your competence? Is it your problem solving ability? Is it your ability to build trust? Is it your solution oriented mentality? What is your greatest asset? Just drop that in the chat for me very, very quickly in the chat box. And I'm just going to look there and see what persons say. What is the greatest asset that you think you bring to any organization that hires you? And again, your competence, add your intelligence, your problem solving ability, your ability to develop solutions, or your ability to build trust with anyone that you have a relationship with. Which of those would you say personally is your greatest asset? So I have several persons saying developing solutions, solution oriented, ability to build trust, building trust, driving solutions, being people oriented. So now I'm starting to see quite a few persons highlighting. So thanks for that. I'm seeing quite a few persons highlighting building trust, and that's fantastic. Why is that fantastic? Well, this quote again sums it up pretty nicely. Trust isn't just the greatest currency, it is the only currency. Once trust is gone in any form of currency, the value is gone. Trust is the single most important thing that you can have in the workplace. That is person's ability to trust you. So your competence helps with that trust, because if you're not competent, then you can't deliver. Therefore, I can't trust you to deliver results. You being solution oriented, I'm only going to trust your solutions. Sorry, I'm only going to use your solutions if I trust you. Relationship management. None of us wants to have a relationship with some person that we can't trust. I think that we all know that for a fact, whether that be a romantic relationship or otherwise. If your friends disappoint you, it is one of the hardest things for you to confide in that person, to want to do anything for that person, because trust is so important and trust is so critical in the workplace. So in the example that I just gave, when I went in and said, yeah, I hoping to be HR manager sometime soon, I'm thinking that that boss was thinking at the time, can I trust him, or will he be trying to, but he spent his time trying to show me up. Will he try to use his time just to make himself look good? And that interaction was a major learning lesson for me. So Hewitt would have gone on to say star performers are very likely to attract sponsors and loyal performers are very likely to keep them. But if they fail to distinguish themselves, those loyal performers run the risk of becoming permanent seconds, lieutenants who never make captain. To position themselves for the top job, proteges must therefore contribute something the leader praises but may intrinsically lack. So now we're starting to make this transition from recognizing that, yes, you are there to support. Yes, you are there to add value. Yes, you are there not to make it all about you. But at the same time, you do want to reap the rewards later on. And again, that is the role of the sponsor. The sponsor is there to position you for all that you can benefit from, but only if they trust you. So once we understand then what the workplace requires, and like I said, it goes beyond your marketing degree, it goes beyond your HR degree, it goes beyond how fantastic you are at accounts. And you understand is about how well can you build trust in the workplace. Then you can start to move in the right direction. So my tips are largely going to be around that. How do you build trust? And in so doing, how do you actually start to get your manager to be influenced by you? Because when we talk about management, management has changed from directing people and telling people what to do to using influence. And what I'm really here to say, regardless of what you may have interpreted when you first saw the title, this is about influence. How do you influence that person that sees your performance better than anybody else in the company? How do you get that person to be your biggest cheerleader? How do you get that person to be your sponsor? Again, that person will have such a major impact, or can have such a major impact on your career. So the first thing that I shared is that it's not about you. And the second one is personal branding. So you've heard this before. You may have some sessions coming up later that will touch on this. But be clear as to what your brand represents. What is it that your brand represents? So is it that you are, is it reliability? Is it, some of you said solution oriented? Are you very innovative? Are you very confident? Are you more laid back? Be very clear what your brand represents and be consistent in that. And I like to use the example of, if you were to purchase a high-end brand, but it was made from cheap products, that's incongruent, that's inconsistent. Likewise, when it comes to, so you're not going to take that high-end brand seriously if the inputs, if the product is low end. Similarly, what does your brand represent? And if you're presenting one thing but delivering another, that's inconsistency in your branding. So you need to be very clear about what it is that your brand represents. If you go into a company, let's say an accounting firm, and you say that you believe in integrity and doing things above board and so on, and your manager asks you to do something that you know is wrong, then you need to be able to put down your foot and say, sorry, I can't do that for this reason. And even if they may be upset in that moment, ultimately you can defend that my brand can't be compromised based on a directive that you're given. Yeah. Again, these types of things build trust. There was one organization that I worked with, and I'm not going to go into details, but just to say that the CEO would have asked me to do something that I knew as an HR practitioner was wrong, and it would expose the business. And I remember, we kind of had it out. I'll be very frank with you. It was a very uncomfortable conversation. And after the conversation, well, the last thing that I said to him was that, you hired me to do a job. And if you don't think that I'm capable of doing the job because you want to make those decisions unilaterally, then I don't think you need to have someone sitting in this seat. And I mean, like I said, it was a pretty heated exchange. And when I left, I remember calling one of my boys and I said, I think I just got myself fired. When I explained the situation, he said to me, "Yeah, Shane, I think you just got yourself fired." But as much as that was the case, I went to work the next morning. I didn't unpack my laptop. I literally sat at my desk just waiting to be called in the office. And I remember the CEO passed me. He looked in my office. He didn't speak. He went to his desk, and I would have waited. And then the regional CEO passed. And when he got into his office, and me and the regional CEO, we never had a relationship. And he called me and I said, "Well, definitely this is it." And he recounted what he had heard and asked me if it was true. And I said, yeah. And he asked me why I took the stance that I did. And I said, why. And then he pretty much told me he never thought I had it within me, but he fully respected what I did. And I'll go back and you know, do your day's work. And I was blown away. And I guarantee you that from the very next day, almost any decision the regional CEO would call me for. He actually then became my sponsor. And what I started to get exposed to within that short space of time was more than I was being exposed to before. So the visibility again that we talk about had increased because now he had insight to what was happening at group level. And I was starting to get involved in things that were happening at group level. And all because of being clear with respect to what your brand stands for. So prep for the long game, but play the short one. And what do I mean by that? And next thing that's critical for you when you go into any organization is being detail oriented. Now, many people say that, but they really aren't. I remember there was a young lady that used to report to me, and every time she would come to me with a suggestion, I mean, she was fantastic when it came to coming up with ideas, but she never really fleshed it out or asked herself the tough questions, whether it be about how we'll get it done, the potential fallout, etc. And every time she would literally had an open door, and she would rush in the office all excited and give me this idea, and then I would normally have about 5 or 10 questions, and I stopped her after maybe the third or fourth time, and I said, "Look, before you come to me, prep, because I will have the questions, and I know you don't like fielding my questions." So I remember the next time she ran in my office, and as soon as she saw me look up, she said, "I am coming back because I am not ready." And that was the turning point. That's when I recognized she got it. She understood. So when I say this, bosses naturally have a lot going on. So they don't need you to drag on and necessarily give them all the details, but come ready with the details. Come ready knowing if they ask me this, or if they ask me the cost, or if they ask me the fallout, or what can happen if we do this, have those answers ready. Because if you don't, I can't trust you because you're not ready. I can't gamble and give you bigger projects because you may embarrass me. And that's the reality of what managers and by extension your potential sponsors will be thinking. Are you exposing them or are you essentially making them look good? A next example is actually, and for the persons who said being solution oriented, I'll put this one at you, not to comment in the chat, but just to kind of think about. So one of the challenges that companies are having right now. So let's say that you are working in a logistics role, a purchasing role, and a logistics role. One of the challenges that companies in distribution are having right now is getting supplies into Barbados, and largely because supplies coming from certain markets come through Panama. And as a result of COVID, Panama pretty much is on a more aggressive lockdown than we are. So shipments coming out of Panama are delayed. there are two potential employees that you can have. The first employee realizes that there's an issue of shipments coming from Panama, and they go to their boss and they say, boss, we got an issue. We can't get anything coming through Panama. Okay. And the boss will look back at you and wonder what you have to say next. And you might be looking at them thinking that you're waiting for the answer. That isn't playing the long game well. The other employee that will always get more opportunities is the employee that says, look, we have this particular shipment that was supposed to come through Panama. Panama is not a good option. These are the two other options they've identified. This is the difference in timing. This is what it will cost us if we take those particular routes. This is what my recommendation is. Now, you're not disregarding what your boss says. You're just giving them options, and you're showing that you've done the research and that you've done your work. That is playing an effective long game and literally hitting all of the major pieces. Now, there are other things and other details in there. The boss doesn't need to hear them at that stage. They just need to know and understand what are those main things that they need to be aware of to be able to make an informed decision. So if we're talking about being solution oriented, it's not about coming up with one option. I'll be brutally honest. People don't like one option. Even for you, if you go someplace for something to eat, your preference normally, I would bet, is a menu that gives you a couple options: chicken, fish, pork. If you're like me, pork would always win, but chicken, fish, pork, people like options. Give your boss options, not just this is what we have to do, unless you really don't have any other choice. Yeah. And again, if persons have any questions at the end, feel free to reach out. We started a bit late, but we should still finish within the time, and I should still have sufficient time to respond to questions. This next one, some persons may think is a bit egocentric, but never surprise your boss. Bosses don't like surprises. And I actually was doing a management development session recently with a company, and one of the repeated things was that really was an issue, was a pet peeve of all the managers, was when their team members don't tell them of something going wrong. And that's what I mean by surprises. You have a problem, you're working on something, you're going to be late with it, you can't get it solved, you made a bad decision, you screwed up, you spent money badly, but you're too embarrassed to say anything, and you just kind of let it sit there hoping that it magically disappears. That doesn't work well. Never surprise your boss, because ultimately, when you do, you're making them look bad. If your boss has to go to a board meeting at the last minute and hear from someone else of a problem, that's an issue. If your boss hears from you at the last minute just before walking into that board meeting that there's an issue that they could have possibly resolved before, you have a problem. Bosses don't like surprises. So how do you avoid that? Well, one of them is to schedule pre-planned meetings. So my fifth tip to you is schedule pre-planned meetings. Now that seems maybe, as the old people said, a little bit forced, right? But what that is that you go in, even if you're green, even if this is your first job, and say, look, Mrs. X or Mrs. Y, or you may be on a first name basis, and you say, Shane, could we possibly have a meeting once a week, Monday mornings, Tuesday afternoon, Friday evening, whatever works for you. And the intent of that meeting is for you to share maybe what you are working on, progress that you've made, ideas that you've had, but by kind of commanding or trying to fit yourself into your boss's calendar, you're saying that you're proactive. You're saying that you want to communicate, you want to share. You're saying that you want to discuss things that have value. There are few bosses that wouldn't appreciate that. And there may be occasions when they can't commit to that meeting, but they will see the value, because you know what? It means that they won't be surprised. It means that there's open sharing. It means that they'll always know what's going on. And if they like what they're seeing, believe me, they will start to naturally share more with you, which will benefit you in the long run. So by you insisting on it, even if they have not, and again, note, we're not waiting on our bosses to do certain things. We're anticipating situations and we're managing them, because essentially you're managing your boss. Now, understanding and managing value conflicts. This is a major one. This is one of the ones that more than likely, if you have an older brother and sister working, that you've heard them say, you may have heard your mother or father saying, you may have worked before and you may have experienced it for yourself. But recognizing that there are significant value conflicts in the workplace. And what do I mean by that? Well, it is said that this particular time is the time that you have more generations in the workplace than ever before. You may have heard this topic beaten to the hilt, but I need to say it because it's one of the biggest frustrations for anyone in the workplace right now. And I can promise you, it is something that when you see it and you experience it firsthand, it could be a shock. So again, I want you to think of I want you to think of this particular value, respect, because in reality, everyone wants to be respected. Everyone wants to be respected. But what does respect look like for you? So you go into a workplace and you see you want to be respected, by your colleagues and so on. What does respect in the workplace look like or sound like to you? And again, just drop that in the chat box for me very quickly. Rather than jump into slide, I'll just let you drop it in the chat box. What does respect look like to you? And just put it there. So to give you an example, it might be getting called Mr. Howell, or it might be getting included in things, um, having your opinion heard. It might be whatever the case is for you. I just want you to share, what does respect look like for you? So Keisha is saying being able to give my opinion. Oh, I like this one as well by Cherise, giving credit for a person's opinion. So, if it's your idea, you want credit for it. Shaquille is saying having my opinion heard is major. Courtney is saying being allowed to share your opinion. Anything else with respect to what respect looks like for you? And for all those persons who share, thank you so much for that. All right, I'm not seeing any new entries right now, and that's fine. But respecting my time. Okay, all right. So Don Marie is actually saying respecting her time. That's an interesting one, Don Marie. I actually had a conversation with a young lady only today's Wednesday on Monday, and she's working remotely. Like most of us are. And she was frustrated because at about 6:15 in the morning, her phone was ringing. Her company phone was ringing. Business call. No, I can't say whether or not it was urgent. What I would say is that she's not in the healthcare field, not in one of those areas that you think there's going to be something major. But from that early in the morning, she was getting a call. And one of the biggest complaints by a lot of persons right now is that since we've been working from home, and it's kind of no longer that 8 to 4:30 kind of setup, you're getting demands for meetings, you're getting calls at 7 o'clock in the night, all sorts of different things. So thanks for that one as well, respecting your time. So I did this exercise, funny enough, with a management team across different companies, and I pulled the same thing up, and I asked them, "What does respect look like for you?" And interestingly enough, we didn't have anyone as young as university students in the group, but I'm not surprised by your responses. Most of you want to be heard. You want your voice to be heard. You want to have an opinion. So even if you're talking about the most serious thing, the biggest thing in the company, persons want to be heard. But you know what many of the older generation said, what the many of the boomers, so to speak, the over 55s, I would say, said? Getting called by your full name, or getting called sir, getting called, like I said, Mr. Howell, Mrs. Holder, that was a big part of it. And next part of it was respecting time, but not from the standpoint of, like how we might like flexible working and so on, but more so from, if your job is from 8, then you should be there for 8, worst case, and ideally be there earlier. And work the full time and don't cheat time, don't steal time. Respect looks very different across the generations. I give you another one. Commitment looks really different across the generations. If I was to ask you what commitment looks like, organizational commitment, commitment to the company, what does that look like? You may say, I'm going to guess that you're going to say delivering results, coming up with new ideas to ensure the business is viable, etc. But there's a set of persons who will say commitment is working overtime. Commitment is being there from an hour before your start time and leaving more than an hour later. It is the reason why there's some persons that work 12 and 14 days and glamorize it like it's, a thing to do. While for some people, they would never want to do that because they believe that their personal time is their personal time. So I say that to say that one of the greatest challenges is, and when it comes to managing your boss, you need to understand now how to manage these conflicts. So when your boss wants you to be working very long hours, but your thing is, I don't mind working extra hours, but I can leave here by a certain time. How do you deal with that? How do you manage that? I know for me, in most of my jobs, I'm very upfront. So pre-COVID, I love the gym. Definitely don't look it now, but I love the gym. Uh, Almost at every interview, I would kind of say in jest, but at the same time, I think they know it was serious. That I normally get to work very early, but by a certain time, maybe about 5:30, I'll be leaving because I need to get in the gym. That's my thing. I don't mind working for you again in the night at home. I put in the next hour or 2 hours just to get what I need to do done. But don't expect to see me there from 7 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. It just won't happen. So my expression of commitment looks different than what my boss might want. So if you're talking about managing your boss, what can you do to ensure that those value conflicts don't undermine what you're trying to achieve? Because what I'm trying to help you here is, how do you get the most value? Your bosses manage you to get performance and productivity. You're managing your bosses to get the results that you want. Learning and development opportunities, career progression, good compensation, etc. So you need to be able to figure this out. You need to be able to identify that, look, both of us want to be respected. Both of us want there to be commitment in the workplace, but it's going to look different. And how do you have a conversation with your boss about that so that you're properly understood as well? Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And then the last major one that I wanted to share is the whole idea of saying thanks to your boss. So I know that in many times person says, the boss never tells me thanks. The boss never says anything nice about me. And it's kind of like that argument about who guards the guard, who motivates the motivator. But bosses likewise appreciate and value when you say thanks. Thanks for teaching me that. Thanks for showing me that. Thanks for sending me on this training. Whatever the case, it shows appreciation. And one of the things I used to always hear is that if you want something repeated, recognize it. So if you want opportunities repeated, recognize and say thanks when they get done. The simple fact that you've shown appreciation, bosses will tend to look at that very favorably. So remembering to say thanks for the opportunity, thanks for that learning note, that learning lesson. Thanks for showing me that particular thing or explaining this particular area that I wasn't clear on. Those 7 tips are simple. They seem almost too straightforward, but I can guarantee you that they're not being practiced consistently. There are few people that actually go to their boss and say thank you. But what happens when you do that? Your boss thinks this person wants to grow and they value my contribution in helping them. So they continue to do it. They continue to feed into you. So these are my 7 tips, whether it be some of it is through research, but I can tell you that each one of these things are things that I've lived, things that I've seen, and so on with respect to when it comes to managing your boss to get the results. As I've said multiple times, bosses want to get performance and they want to get productivity. You want to get something as well, and you need to do what you need to do, which involves guiding and influencing them to get those particular outcomes. It's not about manipulation, because I'm expecting that you're doing this from a very genuine place and a professional place. but it's about understanding the dynamics of people. Human beings, we don't operate in objective, transparent, fully transparent societies. Competence is important, but ultimately you need to understand everything isn't based on merit, which is why the person that might get upper seconds, that is able to engage more and influence more, may get further than that person with first class honors. It's why maybe a person that didn't even get honors, they get some of the most fantastic opportunities. We kind of sometimes say that they're sucking up and so on, but this is moving beyond. This is not about sucking up. This is about understanding how to create sponsors out of your managers. You're converting your manager into your greatest cheerleader. You're converting your manager into the sponsor that is able to propel your career forward. So, with that said, I actually want to open the floor to any questions that you may have. And by doing that, you can either post in the chat. Um, okay, so I'm seeing one of the QAs here is how can you prep for the long game but play short when the leadership is centralized? Okay, that's a fantastic question. But I would actually want a little bit more from you. So when you say leadership is centralized, are you saying that all the decisions coming from one particular person and this particular person is not even a manager that you're reporting into? Um, that would be the my question to get a bit of clarification. Because my thinking is that if you become aware of a situation, even if your manager doesn't have final decision making authority, and by extension, then you are limited in your decision making authority. The simple fact that you got wind of this information means at least you can let your manager know that you've thought it through, that you've done the research, and that you can share. So again, while that decision making, so I'll use an example, a very practical example. I know of, well, we all know there's several companies in Barbados whose head office is actually in Trinidad or overseas in Canada in some cases, and other jurisdictions. Um, I have a friend who works at a company whose, again, decision making it normally rests with their parent company. But what they're still able to do is that when there's an issue on the ground, that person will normally write an opinion or write or submit their thoughts to their manager to say, this is what I think we should do. This is why I believe that this is the decision that we can take. So at least their manager is still aware. The other option is that your sponsor doesn't always have to be your immediate manager. I said that because within Caribbean organizations, many organizations tend to be fairly small, and that person tends to work with you more closely. But at the same time, there are ways that you can actually find sponsors in other aspects of the business. If you admire how some person works, you appreciate their approach. There's nothing wrong with you going to them and saying, "Look, I recognize that I can potentially learn from you, and I just wanted to be able to bounce some thoughts off you." Note how I'm phrasing that. I appreciate that I can learn from you, and I had some ideas, and I just want to be able to bounce some thoughts off you to get your perspective because you are going to understand the bigger picture more so than I might. That is actually positioning you. If you've identified that that person is also a power broker, that person controls some resources, that they recognize that you know your brain turning over, and they may want to engage you further, and they may actually become your sponsor. So while I kind of focus this on your manager, also note that this can extend beyond your immediate supervisor. Yeah. Keisha, I am seeing your question, but well, sorry, it's not phrased as a question. It does not matter. Just does not has been compounded. Just have no. Oh, okay. So the fact that you have no say in organizations, um, it is hard. I won't lie. And again, coming through all the organizations that I came through, it is hard. And some organizations are less receptive than others. And I can't justify that. I wouldn't excuse it. Some persons don't recognize that you may have a voice, Or they don't think, I've even heard companies or persons, senior persons saying, you got to pay your dues. And my counter to that is that these are consumers as well. So you do need to hear from them as well. So yes, some companies don't lend well to hearing you, but there are things that you can do. And like I said, you can formalize it. You can submit position papers. You can write to the company officially. While I always encourage persons to go through the right channels, if you do something in a very formal structure, it gives you more flexibility on how you can approach things. So that is why I started off speaking kind of about influence. Your ability to influence is critical. And unfortunately, some of us, again, just focus on, yeah, this has to make sense. This is my opinion. This is what we should do, not recognizing that we're not using sufficient influence. I'll give you another example to illustrate it. And one of the companies I worked with, when I went in with a degree, a lot of the people around me didn't have degrees, but they were doing their jobs for years and doing it extremely well. And I went in thinking, from all the stuff that I had learned and just, analyzing situations, like, but why don't we do this way? Why don't we do things that way? And I recognized I was getting so much pushback from some of the persons that I was working around. And mind you, I was one of the youngest, no, I was the youngest person actually at the time. And I couldn't understand it. My thing was, but this is for the betterment of the business. Why am I getting so much pushback? Nobody's hearing me. And it was only afterwards, I'm trying to remember if it was one of my mentors at the time, but someone said, when you're trying to make these changes, you need to recognize that you're not dealing strictly with facts. You're actually attacking people. So when you're saying that this policy doesn't make sense, or this procedure isn't good enough, or this needs updating, you forget that someone else designed that. And you're now saying that that person's work is irrelevant. That person's contribution is obsolete. And people don't respond well to that. And it was at that point that I recognized that influence went far beyond objective facts. Going back to what I said, we don't live in an objective world. And we need to understand how to use influence to start to nudge people in the directions that we want to go in. So that's how I would answer you on that question, having lived it, having seen it, and hopefully you see some value in that response. Yeah. Any other questions? And I mean, feel free to unmute yourselves. Well, actually, I don't think that, yeah, that the mics are enabled. So feel free again to submit your questions through the Q&A or through the chat. If there are no further questions, Domri, that would be it from me. I'm not sure if you have any questions or anything that you want to share at this point. But I just want to thank everyone for their participation
Yeah.
throughout the session.
So thank you very much, Shane. This was a very informative presentation, and I was glad to see the participation that was happening. I don't, if students, if there was anyone who wanted to to ask a question live, we could accommodate that. But I do thank those of you who would have shared your answers via the Q&A. Very useful ideas, very useful points to bear in mind, especially for persons not just in the organization already, but about to enter the workplace. And I think that if you remember nothing else, and there is quite a bit to take away, just remember that it is not about you. And I think that is an important thing as we move and we navigate in the workplace, but to think about how you can manage your relationships and how you can consider that person that you're engaging with. And as Shane encouraged you to do in his closing remarks, manage that balance between addressing policy or changing ideas or adding value, but also being able to manage the relationship, because we're doing what we do in organizations with people, even though there is a bottom line that we also want to affect. So I just want to thank you very much, Shane, for those insights. Thank you to our participants.